So this is our last week, okay, in God's economy, and I know it's been, I know for you, for me, it's been a great series. Obviously, ready to move on next week as we get into 1 Peter during Easter, but this has been a great series. And I chose these two verses because both of these authors wrote these books under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, and the major themes actually of both books is joy. And this last sermon in God's economy is titled, Enjoy. How do you enjoy the life that God has given you? What does that look like to take joy in what you have? And so I thought it'd be good to look at Solomon and Paul, because both of these men who were the authors, Solomon of Ecclesiastes, Paul of Philippians, kind of the whole spectrum of wealth is represented by these two guys. Solomon was King David's son, the first king of Israel, and by all accounts was one of the wealthiest men to ever live. The stats, you try to add them up, and there's, fudge on $1 million here and there, but essentially he made $560 million a year for something like 40 years. And so that equates, when you do the math, to a lot, okay? A lot of money. He was very, very wealthy. And so Solomon, it wasn't just money. He liked women, and he had 1,000 wives and concubines, 700 wives, 300 concubines, which I can't even fathom, by the way. I've hard enough pleasing and loving one woman, much less 1,000. That would be very challenging. But Solomon, for whatever reason, thought that was a good idea. And he says many times in Ecclesiastes, I did not deny myself any pleasure. Well, no kidding, right? 1,000 wives and girlfriends. And he actually said this in Ecclesiastes 2. He says, I said to my heart, he would talk to his heart a lot in Ecclesiastes, I'm going to test you with pleasure. And so Solomon says, I built houses. And I thought, I'm going to build the grandest, greatest houses, and I'm going to enjoy them, and that's going to make me happy. And then he said, well, that was okay, but I needed a little bit of, some distraction even from my beautiful houses. So I'm gonna get the finest wine in the land. I'm gonna cheer my heart with wine. And apparently he wasn't pleased with the wine in the land, and so he said, well, I'm gonna have my own vineyards, and I'm gonna make my own wine, and I'm gonna have my own gardens to walk around with my wine as I enjoy my house and my gardens. And that wasn't good enough. I guess he needed somebody to take care of his house and take care of the garden. So he says, I'm going to buy a bunch of servants, and I'm going to pay them to take care of all my stuff. And that was okay, but it wasn't enough. And he needed some entertainment while he was drinking his wine, enjoying his mansions, and putting his servants to work. So he literally paid for servants to come in and do nothing else but sing, right? Kind of like the rich kid in Beverly Hills who had the Rolling Stones at his birthday party. That's basically what Solomon did, right? He just invited all of these people to come in and entertain him while he sat around and ruled the land. Now, this is the same guy who says, enjoy your life. Enjoy your life. And if you have any kind of intellectual prowess about you, you're probably saying, well, who is he to be talking about enjoying your life? Who is he to be talking about contentment, right? This guy had everything. Of course he's content. How can he tell me to be content? How can he tell me to enjoy my life? Of course you can be content when you have that kind of wealth and that kind of opulence and that kind of extravagance. It's easy to be content when you have all that stuff. And when you hear stuff like that, it's kind of easy to blow Solomon off and go, well, it'd be like if Bill Gates told me to be content with what I have. You can blow rich people off, but it's hard to blow Paul off. Because to blow Paul off, in a sense, is almost like to blow Mother Teresa off when she would give a charge about contentment. Because Paul, as we'll see in just a moment, defines contentment not from a place of crazy and extreme wealth, but actually from a place of voluntary poverty. And so these texts are very interesting. They have everything to do with joy and contentment, but what we're going to see is joy and contentment have little to do with wealth. In fact, and you know this to be true if you know anybody that's pretty wealthy, Many people who are very wealthy, many of those folks have the least amount of joy and contentment in their life. So money doesn't equal joy. Money doesn't equal contentment. What is contentment? Well, in a basic sense, it's being happy with your situation in your life. It's being satisfied. It's being okay with what you have and who you are. Contentment is really the ability to enjoy your life. That's what it means to be content, that you're okay with what you have. And here's the good news. The Bible doesn't just say that contentment is preferable or that it's possible or that it's a good idea. The Bible both promises and commands contentment. Paul, writing to Timothy in 1 Timothy 6:8 says, if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. It's a very, very powerful verse if you try to apply it literally to your life. In Hebrews chapter 13, verse 5, it says, keep yourself free from the love of money. That's what we've been talking about the whole series. And be content with what you have. Contentment is your current happiness with your situation in life. It's being okay with what you have. Contentment measures how satisfied you are with your life. So let me ask you a question from 1 to 10. 1 being, I'm not satisfied at all. I'm totally dissatisfied. I'm totally eaten up with it. 1 being that. 10 being, I can't believe it's not heaven. I can't believe right now I'm not in heaven. Okay? Where are you? 1 to 10. Rank yourself. 1 to 10, where are you? The Bible talks a ton, as I said, about contentment, how it promises and commands it. And one of the ways the Bible talks about contentment is when it tells us to not covet. Now, you have a bulletin, and in your bulletin is a verse from the Ten Commandments. I'd like you to look at it. Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. Exodus 20, 17. This is the last of the Ten Commandments. Says, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Coveting. Coveting on one level, as we're going to see, is simply wanting what you don't have. It's simply looking at something that you don't have, grasping it, kind of this interior drive that wants something, really, and what you're looking for in that something is wholeness and meaning and completeness, apart from God, by the way. And so when God says don't covet, which he says a lot, right? We don't use that word a lot. God uses it a lot. When God says that, don't covet, what he's saying is, I want you to experience me in such a way that you're content with all the stuff that you have. That's what it means to not covet. And you get a glimpse of this in the Ten Commandments. See, there's many ways to look at the Ten Commandments. One way to look at it is, it's the conduct that nourishes our covenant relationship with God. Okay? Another way to look at it is, it's the moral law. It's that which exposes sin in us and shows us that we need a Savior. But another way to look at the Ten Commandments is kind of a cause and effect relationship. The first commandment being the cause, the last commandment that we just read being the effect. The first commandment says, have no other gods before me, which is another way of saying, love God above everything else. The last commandment, commandment 10, says, don't covet, or another way to say it is, be content. The first commandment and the last commandment are almost like bookends in that way. And so what you see is, if you keep the first commandment, that means you're experiencing God's presence, God's peace, and God's power. And if you're keeping that commandment, then contentment will necessarily follow. If you keep the first commandment, you're going to be keeping the last commandment, and all the ones in between, by the way. Proper worship then equals joy. Proper worship equals contentment. That's what God is saying in the Ten Commandments. But on the other side of it, if you fail to love God above all, coveting will necessarily creep in. And coveting, this inner drive, this desire for fulfillment and completeness apart from God, will erode contentment from your life, no matter how much money you do or don't have. It is the enemy of contentment. It is the opposite. And so I want to drill down a little bit on coveting, because if we're going to understand contentment, a lot of times you understand a concept when you study its opposite. And so you get into the New Testament and you look at the way that Paul, our author of the book of Philippians, talks about contentment and coveting. He says in Colossians 3:5, he says, I want you to put to death all kinds of sins, sexual immorality, and he lists a whole bunch of other sins. Then he says, coveting, last one, which is idolatry. Coveting is idolatry. Now, typically, we think of coveting as wanting things we don't have, but the way idolatry is used in the Bible, it's not as much about things we want that we don't have, it's about over-wanting the things we do have. It's about over-desiring the good things in our life. We covet not just when we desire something we don't have, we covet when we over-desire the things that we do have. See, let me explain this with exercise and diet. I know we got a lot of fitness freaks in the house, and those of you who are very passionate about working out, and you're into how, some of you measure your food, some of you are really like into organic food, and you're really into, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all, but it might be. It might be. If you're really passionate and committed to diet and exercise, sometimes you can be obsessive about it to the point that it literally rules your life. A lot of people do that. A lot of people do that with leisure. One author said, we don't really have leisure anymore, and we don't have work. What we have is weisure. We kind of do both. And so a lot of people are committed to not just weisure, but leisure. And leisure, if you're overcommitted to leisure, leisure's good, right? We talk about Sabbath a lot around here, about you really should pull back and enjoy God and His creation in your life. That's a good thing. But if you're overcommitted to leisure, if you over-desire leisure, what happens is you become lazy, undisciplined, and irresponsible. It becomes idolatry. Chilling out becomes an idol, right? It's possible to covet your stage in life. For instance, if you're single, and actually the majority of our church is single. And what can happen if you're committed to being single is you focus on it so much you become too independent, too self-reliant. You become selfish. Likewise, if you're married without kids and you become too focused on your spouse, you literally make your spouse almost God. What happens is you become codependent. Those of you who have kids, and we have a lot of new babies in the church, don't drink the water. They're everywhere. What happens is when you have kids, especially the first kid, and if you're not careful, depending on your personality, depending on your temperament, depending on your family system, sometimes you can literally make your child the object of everything in your life, including your marriage, and you live this vicarious life where your identity and your significance rises and falls based on your child's performance, based on your child's attitude. See, coveting is idolatry when we over-desire the good things that are in our life, right? Coveting is more than that, though, and when the Bible also talks about coveting, and this is more familiar, it's about things that we don't have that we want. And there's a little phrase that's used actually throughout the Bible, lust of the eyes. Lust of the eyes. That's when you want something that you don't have. The thing you're lusting after with your eyes is the thing that you think, if I have that, then I'll be complete. If I have that, then my life won't be boring and mundane like it is now. If I have that, then I'll be happy. This type of coveting basically says, if I have this, whatever this is, then my life will be complete. So it's not about what you have, it's what you want to have. And this type of coveting is when you desire something so much that you lose your joy and contentment in God. You want something so much, you put so much of your hope, so much of your affection, so much of your desire and dream in this thing that you lose your contentment and joy in God. And the contentment and joy that your heart should be getting from God, it starts to get from that thing. Or another way to say it is, you gradually lose your contentment in God, and so you start looking for it in other things, That's coveting. If I have this, my life will be complete. I've only done that kind of coveting about 1,000 times in my life. I've documented these several times, so I won't try not to tell the same story twice, but I thought of another one this week as I was preparing for the message. My first car. Do you remember your first car? So my first car was a 78 Chevy Impala. Now, when some of you hear the word Impala, you think, ooh, cool car. Not so much in the 70s. That's the 60s. This was grandma's old car, literally, right? Big maroon thing. And it was great, low mileage, 8-track. But don't worry, I had a cassette adapter for my 8-track. Don't worry. I was hooked up. So I'm rolling in the 78 Impala. And, of course, in high school, this is even before the seatbelt laws, I think. That dates me a little bit. But when you had a girlfriend that was riding with you, she didn't sit over. I mean, this car, you could fit like 15 people in it. So it was so big. It was unbelievable. But she could have we could have 4 people in the front seat. But she was little. She was like 5'1". But if you had a girlfriend, she didn't sit over there. She sat right next to you, right? So you're driving. You can barely drive because that's just how we rolled back in Southern Illinois, okay? And so she was right next to me, and I was distracted by her. She was cute and whatever. And I mean, like the first week I had this car, I'm looking at her, we're driving on the way to school, and bam, right in the back of this other kid's car. And I didn't have any money, so I couldn't get my bumper fixed, so it was a bad deal. But I was thinking, I put all this hope in my car, then I crashed it, and then my hopes were dashed. And I thought it was cool to have a car until all my friends got cooler cars, right? See, when you covet something, you're almost always disappointed. Almost always. And some of you go, well, okay, and I remember doing this. When I get out of school, then my life will be better. When I get my first job, then. When I get married, then. When I have a kid, then I'll be complete. So fill in the blank for yourself. But you know what your object of coveting is because that's what you daydream about. You know what your object of coveting is because when all hell is breaking loose around you, that's where your heart just kind of drifts to. You fantasize about it, you think about it, you really focus on it. It brings you comfort when things are getting hard. If I have this, my life will be complete. You know what that is? That's worship talk. If I have this, my life will be complete. If I have this, I'll be happy. That's worship talk. Coveting erodes contentment. Now, this brings us to Philippians 4. Because Paul talks about this idea of joy and contentment. How do you enjoy your life? How are you okay with who you are and what you have? And he says it in a very interesting way in verse 12. He says, I know how to be brought low, and I know how to abound. And he's saying, I know how to suffer, and I know how to not suffer and actually enjoy things. In any and every circumstance, and if you read about his life, he was in literally any and every circumstance. Being almost killed versus sitting in the palace with a king. Then he writes this interesting thing at the end of verse 12. I have learned the secret of facing plenty, hunger, abundance, and need. Contentment, Paul says, is a secret. So I remember reading this and thinking, well, what is God? Is this some kind of Trinitarian secret? Like the Trinity's whispering to each other about how great contentment is, and we'll never know? Is this just for God's choice servants like Paul? What do you mean contentment, being okay no matter what is going on in your life? What do you mean that's a secret? What's he talking about? Well, I think what he's saying is the way of contentment is secretive in the sense that it's not well known. It's not experienced often. It's not easy to find. It's elusive. You don't have people modeling it for you. It's a secret in that way. And what I think Paul is describing is one of the most frustrating realities of the human condition. That there is this deep desire in the human heart to have something that nothing in this world can satisfy. There's a craving. There's a desire in us for something. And we're looking for that to be quenched, for that to be satisfied. And we're looking all over the place, but we never really find it. Wallace Stevens says it this way. He says, what I want, the thing I desire, even being content with the things of this world, is an imperishable bliss. An imperishable bliss. We love perishable blisses, don't we? A new relationship, a new house, a new car, a new gadget, right? A promotion at work, when your team wins the sports championship, a beautiful sunset, a vacation, and they're all great, but they all leave us wanting more. We experience it, but it doesn't quite do it for us, which is why vacations are so painful, because we have to come back. All they do, these pleasurable experiences, all they do is stir up desires in us for more. That's really what they do. And here's how contentment is a secret. Because the things that seem to bring us contentment on this earth are merely pointers to a greater contentment. They're pointers to an ultimate contentment, an ultimate joy. Have you ever been driving down the road on some kind of road trip, some kind of long driving experience, some kind of vacation, and you were literally so hungry that you could eat at McDonald's? Does that ever happen to anybody? And you're driving down the road, and normally you would not opt for the quarter pounder with cheese that has like 85,000 grams of fat. You wouldn't do it, but the billboard comes up, and you see those golden arches. And here's what we do with contentment. It would be like you're starving. You're trying to hold out and you can't. You haven't eaten. Maybe you're in a rush and you're driving and you've been driving forever and you're starving and the only place open is McDonald's. And it would be like you jump out, you pull off the interstate, you jump out of the car, you get under the sign, and you literally start jumping up and down because you're now at the billboard of McDonald's. That's what we do with these experiences. We stop at the billboard. We stop at the pointer instead of going on to the reality. See, we were made literally to experience God. The Church Father Augustine says, all of us have a God-shaped hole inside us. And our hearts are restless, he says, until we find rest in God. But here's what we do. We typically settle for three things, three approaches for contentment. And I'll illustrate these. First one is this. You look for people, or look to people or stuff for contentment and joy, right? I remember our first house. We bought it in 1997. And our first house was in this subdivision in the suburbs of Kansas City, North Kansas City. And all the houses were the same in the whole subdivision, basically. But we didn't care because it was our first house. And my whole prerequisite was, is the backyard big enough so we can play wiffle ball? And is the driveway flat enough so I can have a basketball goal? That was really my criteria. My wife had other criteria. That was mine. And so this house matched that. She didn't know about my criteria. I kept that secret, much like contentment. But I kept it secret. But we bought this house. And we were just so delighted because we had this house. It was only like 10 or 12 years old. And then we drove down into this area of Kansas City called Brookside, which was all these older homes, and you could barely find the same house on the street that were, all the floor plans are different. They're old. And we thought, oh, we want an older home. That's what we want. We don't want the cookie cutter. Everybody's the same floor plan. We don't want that. We want uniqueness. We want to get our hands dirty, man. We want to rehab this thing. And so we moved to St. Louis, and so we bought an old home. And that was great for like a week. And then, reality set in. And then one of our friends moved to town, and they built a new home. So then we thought, wow, what we need is a new home, right? People do this with the spouses, too. We basically go, if I could just find somebody, the right person, everything would be fine. The immortal words of Jerry Maguire, right? You remember that he says to Renee, what's her name in the movie Jerry Maguire? You complete me, right? We are looking for that person, and those of you who are single, this is your temptation. And those of you who are married, this is also your temptation, unfortunately, to think, if I can just find somebody that can complete me. The problem is, when you have that kind of criteria, you got to complete me, that puts more weight on the relationship than it can possibly bear. Because the Bible says, spouses do not complete you, they complement you. That's a different deal. But people look to houses and spouses, and people look to possessions. A couple years ago, I bought my wife a digital camera. We'd held out, forever because, the longer you wait, the cheaper they get, the better technology and all that. And we don't take that many pictures. But she wanted a digital camera to take pictures of the kids. So, okay, I'll buy her one for Mom's Day. And so Mother's Day, I bought her a digital camera. Well, then mysteriously, the camera disappears. We can't find it anywhere. For 6 months, we can't find it. This week, we're in the garage, and we find the camera. And what had happened was we had taken pictures of the kids when we were raking leaves in our yard, and we know because they were the last pictures, and set it on a shelf in the garage, and then it's been in there all winter. We've been storing it in the garage for the winter, right? And I looked at the camera, because I've been thinking, we're going to have to buy a new camera now. It's so funny how technology works. You upgrade to whatever level it is, then you're dependent on it. So I thought, well, I got to buy a new camera. And I was looking at our camera. I'd kind of forgotten what it was. And I'm like, well, those aren't enough megapixels. What is up with this? We got to buy a new camera. Well, it was fine 6 months ago, right? So this is how this coveting thing works. Your TV, well, do you have a flat screen? Well, how thin is your flat screen? Well, do you have HD? Do you have full HD? Do you have really full HD? It never ends. Possessions and the desire for them and your thought that if I get this, then my life will be great. If I get this, then my life will not be boring. It never ends. You're constantly assaulted with it. And it's very deceiving because some of these things, when you buy them, some of these things, when you possess them, they do make you feel better. And the deception is because certain things like that in this world arouse the desire that's in you, the deception is that those things will complete the desire that's in you. And the problem is our life is bigger than any of these things that we try to rest them on. We were not made to be completed by a house or a spouse or a gadget. So the question that I would encourage you to ask yourself is, where is your hope for contentment directed? What is that for you? When it gets hard, what do you think of? If I have this, then my life will be complete. Contentment and joy in people and possessions is an option. Here's another option that people choose. They just kind of give up altogether. They don't really think it's possible. And some of you have gotten there. You've stopped pursuing happiness in this world, not because you're pursuing God, but because you don't want to be disappointed anymore. Because you're kind of tired of getting excited about the new gadget, the new car, the new relationship. You're kind of done with that. You know it doesn't work. So you just kind of shut everything down. Some of you in college, you've done this. You're into a major now. And to change your major would be a major hassle. You'd have to explain to your parents and maybe your grandparents and maybe your advisor, and it would just disrupt the apple cart, even though you know that if you continue in this is really not what you're called to do, but you're already there, and you just think, you know what? I'm just going to settle. I know what my heart's telling me. I know this isn't it, but I'm already in. I'll just settle. Some of you who are single, I've even heard, if you ever say this to me as a single person, know that you're going to be rebuked, okay? So I'm warning you right now. I'm never going to get married. What is that? Well, that is a settling. That is a giving up. That is a protecting your heart issue. Well, my marriage will never have passion, and it's okay. We like each other. We don't really love each other, but we'll hang in there. We'll be faithful. The Bible says not to divorce. Right? Well, I don't know. The economy's tough. This job, it's not great, but I'm just going to stick in there and just kind of hang in there. I don't know if I need, new friendships are challenging. It's risky. I tried to do some ministry one time. I tried to jump in. It didn't work out, so I'm just going to hang back. What are you doing? You're protecting yourself. Self-protection is a form of pride. Self-protection basically says this: I'm not going to get hurt anymore. So I'm going to close myself off. I'm not going to risk. And I'm going to stay nice and controlled. And I'm just going to play it safe. And some of you are like that. You're on autopilot. You're dead on the inside. You are literally, you've literally given up. Your hopes and dreams are gone because you dare not risk to have them. Many of you have done that. Many of your friends have done that. You don't expect much, but you don't experience much. It's an option. I'm not saying it's a good option. It's an option. Here's the option I want you to consider. Look in verse 11. Paul tells us, you can look to Jesus. Verse 11, he says, not that I'm speaking of being in need, for I've learned in whatever situation I am to be content. I know how to be brought low. I know how to abound in any and every circumstance. I've learned the secret of facing plenty and hunger, abundance and need. See, the word contentment is from the Greek word arches, which literally means, the word archa means to be full, and the word aut means by yourself. In other words, to be full by yourself, to be okay with who you are, to be just right. Not needing abundance, not needing poverty. See, we need contentment not just when things are hard, but when things are good. Because in need, what contentment does, it reminds us that only God can provide. But in abundance, contentment reminds us that only God can truly satisfy. And see, when you begin to understand this idea of contentment, verse 13 becomes more than a bumper sticker. It becomes more than a little trite thing that athletes say after they win. It becomes more than a screensaver. It becomes your life. Verse 13, you've heard it. I can do all things through him who strengthens me. I can do all things. See, when Christ is truly your strength, you're able to deal with failure and success, being in need and in plenty. But when you're depending on your own strength, you're crushed by failure and you're made arrogant by success. You oscillate when you're not living at that gospel equilibrium, that contentment. You oscillate. You're beat up or you're blown up. You are literally prideful or full of despair. Which is why most church people, their faith is like this. Why? Because they're not depending on Christ's strength. They're depending on their own strength. Most, I don't know who coined the term first, it wasn't me. Most church folks live like practical atheists. Now, there are not a ton of atheists in the world, like percentage-wise. They're actually growing in number, but most people live like what do you mean practical atheist? Well, you depend primarily on your own strength, and you live mostly as if this world is all there is to it. You depend on your own strength, and then you live as if this world is kind of the end. Peggy Noonan says it this way. Her quote is in your bulletin. She says, our ancestors believed in two worlds and understood this one to be the solitary, poor, nasty one. We, in our kind of generation, are among the first to believe that we can find our happiness here completely on earth. And our search for it has actually produced unhappiness. The reason is that if you do not believe in another higher world, and you think this world is your only chance of happiness, then when you are denied happiness in this world, you aren't just disappointed, you're in despair. Why is suicide like the fourth leading cause of death? I just saw it from people from like 18 to 60. Despair. All their hope is in this world. But here's what you have to do, and this is where worship changes everything, because you get your heart directed right, and you begin to see the higher world, and you hear the higher world, and you feel the higher world calling to you. Imperishable blisses, teases of contentment, moments of pleasure, little splashes of joy. You don't stop at the billboard and jump up and down. You literally go, oh, there's something better. This is an invitation to something better. I may not get it all right now, but it exists. It's out there. It's God's invitation. to a bigger world, to live in the reality of a bigger world. This is what C.S. Lewis says. He says, if I find in myself a desire in which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. Contentment is but a foretaste of eternal bliss. The question, how do I experience contentment, is the same question as how do I experience Christ's strength? Same question. That's why Paul ties them together. God brings contentment to those who forsake trying to get it on their own, and God strengthens those who will not try to strengthen themselves and rely on their own resources and energies. And if you want to move from coveting to contentment, from this inner grasping to inner peace, what do you have to do? You have to come to the end of your strength. This is why Christianity is hard and easy. It's hard because you got to die. It's easy because it's not your strength and it's not your work. It's His work and His strength. You have to come to the end of your pursuit of contentment outside of God. In the same place in your life right now, and I guarantee all of us have it, there's some place in your life where it's relational, marriage, job, not being married, right? Health issues, financial. There's something that you're going, I'm discontent, I'm not happy. That is the very area in your life you need to receive Christ's strength. That's it right there. That's where worship starts. Right there, in that place. So as we close, I want us to consider some questions together. That question I just asked, where in my life am I discontent? It's a really good question. What am I enjoying too much? That's another good question. Where's my idolatry in my life right now? Now here's another one. What am I not enjoying enough? I've kind of taken the negative side, but let me just tell you, just a couple things. It's okay to chew your food more than twice before you swallow it. It really is okay to sit and enjoy a meal. It is really okay for you to enjoy your house or your apartment. It may not be exactly what you want, but it is shelter for you. And I'm sure it's maybe not decorated like you would like, but I'm sure there's a room, there's a spot, there's somewhere you enjoy. Do you ever just sit there and enjoy it? I'm sure there's a park. Yesterday, I just drove around. There's several parks around my house. I drove to every one of them. I haven't done that. I've lived in this house for 6 years. First time I'd done it. Where I just literally said, you know what? It's going to be park day for Darren. And I'm going to enjoy the parks. And that may sound crazy. It was awesome. It was awesome. Filled my soul up. There's things in your life right now you are not enjoying. And so as we go into our time of response, I want you to think about that. We always are like, well, I don't enjoy this, and I wish I had that. What is there right now? What has God given you that you're not taking advantage of? Relationships, possessions. How many books are laying around your house that are just dying to be read? Sometimes they talk. If you get really quiet, they'll say, read me. You promised. You've got some books right now that if you would dive into them, would be life-changing for you. You bought them because you knew that, and then you set them on the shelf, and now there's 2 inches of dust on them, right? What is there for you to enjoy that you're not enjoying? Let's consider these questions together, and let's ask God to speak to us about how we can enjoy our life and how we can go from coveting to contentment. Let's pray together. Lord, we're grateful. It's good and it's hard that we can't even surrender to Christ without the power of Christ, that we can't walk in Christ's strength until we confess our own strengthlessness. So we do that right now. God, we confess that we have nothing to offer you. You don't need anything, but God, you want our lives. And so we want to see the beauty of surrendering our lives. We want to not live for that, if I had this, then I would be happy, lie. Lord, would you help us to see you clearly? Would you help us to see where we're discontent, where we're not receiving your strength? Would you help us start there? Would you help us not just go to religious activity? Would you help us to go to that area of discontent and let your Spirit work in us? That the truth of these verses, that Paul said it's a secret. No matter if I've got plenty or I'm in need, I'm content because the power of Christ is living through me. May we be those people, God. That it's okay. That's the kind of people that the world has no categories for. Everybody gets excited when they get a raise. Everybody gets excited when things are going well. But who in the world can rejoice and be content when things are hard? God, it's your people. So we want to be your people. So would you help us? And my friends here, God, that would tend to be dwell on the negative and get all condemned. Lord, I pray they would just have hope because you've given them things to enjoy. Would you give them just a lot of insight and just practical ways that they can take time to enjoy what they have? Some of us got our kids. We're not enjoying our kids. They're in a stage where it's frustrating, it's hard, they're in diapers, or they're toddlers, or they're just crazy teenagers, and it's so easy to get distracted by all the bad. Help us to enjoy our children. Help us to enjoy our spouses. Some of us that are single right now, God, help us to enjoy that state. Sometimes singles just live for being married. Help them to enjoy the fact that they don't have to worry about somebody else, that they can focus on you and focus on what you're doing in them right now solely, and help them enjoy that. Wherever we need strength, we want that, Lord. We need that. Show us what it looks like as we respond to you.